American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel. Welcome to Eyes on Israel. I'm Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. Just over a week ago, Joe Biden made a speech announcing a new proposal that would bring an end to the war between Israel and Hamas. The proposal essentially called for Israel to capitulate to Hamas and stop short of victory. I could probably do an entire episode picking apart the obnoxious lies, misrepresentations, and gaslighting in Biden's short speech, but I won't. But I do want to comment on a few of the highlights.
For the past several months, my negotiators of foreign policy, intelligence community, and like have been relentlessly focused, not just on a ceasefire that would inevitably be fragile and temporary, but on a durable end of the war. That's been the focus, a durable end of this war. One that brings all the hostages home, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power, and sets the stage for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Now, after intensive diplomacy carried out by my team, my many conversations with leaders of Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages.
Here, right off the top, Biden tells a flat-out lie. He says that Israel has offered a new proposal. While it's true that Israel did make a proposal, it was very different from the one Biden outlines here. More on that in a few moments. Biden repeatedly says that Qatar and Egypt are involved in the negotiations. Later in the speech, he says that they will ensure that Hamas complies with any agreement. Now, let's remember that Qatar poured billions of dollars into funding Hamas terrorism all these years, and also provides a luxurious safe haven for Hamas terrorist leadership. The same Qatar that Joe Biden declared in 2022 to be, quote, a major non-NATO strategic ally of the United States, end quote. And Egypt? Egypt, who knowingly allowed Hamas to build dozens of tunnels under the Egypt-Gaza border, used to import all the weapons, munitions, and everything else they needed to build the terrorist war machine? Egypt and Qatar are the honest brokers helping craft a proposal that will ensure Israel's security?
This new proposal has three phases. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. During the 6 weeks of phase one, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase two, which is a permanent end to hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase one to phase two. Israel will want to make sure its interests are protected. But the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase one, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. In the United States, Egypt, and Qatar would work to ensure negotiations keep going. All agreements, until all the agreements are reached and phase two is able to begin. Then phase two would be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza, and as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently, end of quote.
Let's sum this up. Phase one calls for a complete ceasefire and Israel withdrawing from all populated areas in Gaza. In other words, all the areas where Hamas operates. So Israel is supposed to withdraw all its forces without Hamas being destroyed as a military or governing body? Hamas is allowed to survive, rebuild, and govern? Immediately after Biden announced this Israeli proposal, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu released the following statement, quote, Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed. The destruction of Hamas, military and governing capabilities, the freeing of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Israel will continue to insist these conditions are met before a permanent ceasefire is put in place. The notion that Israel will agree to a permanent ceasefire before these conditions are fulfilled is a non-starter, end quote. In other words, Biden lied. He presented what he called an Israeli proposal that did not include what has always remained the absolute red line for Israel, the complete destruction of Hamas as both a political and military organization. Zero capability to govern, zero capability to educate the children of Gaza and to take control of resources. More importantly, Israel's primary goal in this war is not the release of the hostages. Yes, we hope and pray that we can save any hostages that are alive, but we must be very clear. An end to the war that brings all the hostages home, but would leave Hamas as a functioning governing or military entity, is a defeat for Israel. The goal of this war is to ensure that Gaza never again threatens Israel's security. The only way to begin that process is to ensure that the jihadists who educate the children to genocide, receive billions in foreign aid, and are committed, by the words of their own founding charter, to the death of all Jews in the world, are completely defeated.
The people of Israel should know they can make this offer without any further risk to their own security because they've devastated Hamas forces over the past 8 months. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely. Some are even in the government coalition. And they've made it clear they want to occupy Gaza, they want to keep fighting for years, and the hostages are not a priority to them.
I gotta say, of all the infuriating parts of this speech, this one really got to me. You see, here we have Biden telling Israelis that we should feel comfortable allowing Hamas to remain, that we should stop the war before attaining victory because Hamas currently has no capability to do another October 7th. Excuse me, the goal of this war was not to weaken Hamas so they go back to smaller scale terrorism, while they gradually rebuild for the next October 7th, 5, 10, or 50 years in the future. The goal is to defeat them completely. Consider this. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were both genocidal, ideologically driven regimes that indoctrinated their people to embrace evil. Now, how did those regimes become benign, relatively peaceful societies? The answer? They were defeated. Victory works. The lesson of the victories of World War II is that only when evil regimes are unequivocally defeated do their brainwashed populations have a chance of waking up. And isn't it rich to hear Joe Biden say that those in Israel who prioritize total defeat of Hamas to the hostages are interested in prolonging the war indefinitely? No, Joe, those of us who want to see this victory through to the end want to end the war, and we want to end it quickly. A great way to make sure we'll be fighting these psychopathic jihadists indefinitely is to leave them in power. Maybe Biden and his forever war buddies are fine fighting wars that they have no plan for victory in, only to end in surrender that leaves the enemies in power, see Afghanistan. But here in Israel, we actually fight to win. Thank you very much. And while we're on the topic of prolonging the war, in an interview with Time magazine published last week, Joe Biden said that, quote, there is every reason to believe, end quote, that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for political reasons. This, my friends, is what we call gaslighting. You see, the only reason Israel didn't go into Rafah weeks earlier was the pressure from the U.S. delaying the next phase of the war. And as the Wall Street Journal reported over a week ago, Israel scaled back the intensity of the Rafah incursion because of the pressure from the Biden administration, causing Israel to clean out the remaining Hamas strongholds much more slowly than originally planned. And now Netanyahu is the one prolonging the war for political reasons?
Israel could be part of a regional security network to counter the threat posed by Iran. All this progress would make Israel more secure, with Israeli families no longer living in the shadow of a terrorist attack.
Did I mention gaslighting? Biden is offering Israel the wonderful opportunity to be a part of a regional network to oppose Iran. Thank you, President Biden. I do recall that when you came into office, there were sanctions on Iran imposed by one President Donald J. Trump. Iran couldn't sell its oil, leaving them almost bankrupt and without the resources to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who now threaten Israel's survival. It was you, Joe Biden, who stopped enforcing the sanctions and restarted negotiations with Iran, enriching them to the tune of approximately $100 billion to date since you took office. And guess what? When Donald Trump was in office, Israel was already part of a regional security network to counter the Iranian threat. Since taking power, the Biden administration has done everything to enrich and empower Iran at Israel's expense. Hey, Joe, I've got a great idea for weakening the threat that Iran poses to Israel. It has 3 phases. Phase 1, Israel destroys Hamas. Phase 2, Israel defeats Hezbollah. Phase 3, Donald Trump wins re-election, and we go back to peace and prosperity across the Middle East. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. A few weeks ago on this program, we discussed the Chinese Communist Party's involvement in the war against Israel. If you haven't seen that segment, please go to our YouTube or Rumble channels or to americasvoice.news to check it out. At the time, I mentioned the use of TikTok as a platform that has been used to promote anti-Israel and anti-Semitic narratives. I mentioned the Osama bin Laden letter to America that went viral only on TikTok. I also pointed to a video that appeared on Chinese social media praising TikTok for its role in swaying public opinion away from Israel. Have a look.
TikTok 为巴勒斯坦立了大功啊！不知道大家有没有发现啊？这次巴以冲突和以往不一样了。不一样在哪儿呢？以往的西方世界啊，从政府到民间，几乎都是清一色的支持犹太人，不支持的呢，也只是漠不关心的状态。但是啊，这次不一样了。随着以色列军队进攻加沙，加沙平民被无情杀戮的画面，通过 TikTok 等自媒体平台被实时的、不加任何掩饰的展现在全世界人民面前。然后呢，我们就看到了非常不同以往的画面。第一呢，哈瑞迪犹太人焚烧以色列国旗，以表示反对以色列对巴勒斯坦人民的暴行，并表示以色列不能够代表犹太人，以色列违反了犹太教义。第二呢，美国民众在旧金山国会大厦前游行，支持巴勒斯坦。第三，澳大利亚数万人声援巴勒斯坦。第四呢，就是英国伦敦10万人游行支持巴勒斯坦。5就是加拿大民众高举着巴勒斯坦的国旗声援巴勒斯坦人。大家有没有发现啊？美、英、加、澳新的五眼联盟中的4个已经有大规模的民众在游行了，在支持着巴勒斯坦了。这标志着世界人民已经成功的从犹太精英们建立起来的信息蚕茧中挣脱了出来。以前不是他们不辨是非啊，只是被蒙蔽了双眼。现在因为 TikTok 的存在，他们接收到的信息是不加滤镜的真实信息。那些惨死在以色列炮火下的儿童、老人、妇女、无辜平民，唤起了每一个有良知的人。所以知道为什么西方政客们要千方百计地针对 TikTok 了吧？因为这动摇了他们的根本，让他们的奶嘴计划无法顺利地进行。这也许只是一个开始，待民众集体觉醒，就是他们的末日到来之时啊！愿世界和平，愿无辜的百姓、人民平安。
This video appeared on October 30th, just days after Israel launched its ground invasion against Hamas. While TikTok officials claim that the charges of anti-Israel bias are baseless, the evidence is pretty clear. Pro-Hamas posts on TikTok outnumber pro-Israel posts by a ratio of almost 50-1. And just a few weeks ago on Jordanian TV, the former president of the Jordanian Medical Association, one Tarek Taboub, had this to say about TikTok.
محتوى تيك توك 90% هو برو فلسطينيا مع الفلسطينيين و10% لا. وعت الناس بشكل يعني هذه هبه رحمانيه. احنا الناس في بدايه الانترنت كانت الناس تتخوف من الافلام الاباحيه والمش عارف ايش والكلام
هو
الفاضي.
سلاح ذو حدين.
فهي زي اي شيء، هل هي حرام او حلال؟ هي بما تستخدمه لها.
نعم.
فهي هبه من الله سبحانه وتعالى للناس الذين لا يملكون وسيله الاعلام المسيطر عليه، الاعلام الرسمي.
وخدمه القضيه بشكل كتير واضح.
ترى فتيات اوروبيات وامريكيات شقر وتيشيرت وجسمها كله موشوب بتقول لك قرات القران وبكره رايح اسلم.
صحيح.
نتيجه التعرف الصحيح على الفكره.
Considering that TikTok is the primary news source, that's right, for the Gen Z and younger crowd, it should be no surprise that this demographic is far more pro-Hamas and anti-Israel than all other groups in the Western world. You might be wondering, why am I picking on TikTok? Aren't these disturbing statistics merely a reflection of the users on the platform? Why blame the company? The answer is simple. TikTok is not a normal social media company. It's a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. To help us understand this situation, we are joined by tech entrepreneur Brian Costello. Brian Costello has been exposing the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party, especially through TikTok, on many major media outlets. You might have seen him on Fox News or Steve Bannon's War Room or others, and we're honored to be joined by him here on Eyes on Israel. Brian, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So, Brian, you heard my intro, and, especially in our community here in Israel, I'm very disturbed by the fact I'm someone who's a little bit clued in, plugged in, and I see here in Israel so many people using TikTok. It's been normalized in our community, and we're really trying to raise awareness about what they are. So could you fill us in? You don't have to start all the way from the beginning, but just tell us in a few minutes, what is TikTok really?
So TikTok, which the parent company is based in Beijing, is ByteDance, is, I would say, the Western or the American version of a short form video information platform where the content is delivered via machine learning and AI. So one of the reasons TikTok was very successful early on and went viral was your content was not served by following people, but there was technology on the back end that served you content based on your interests, right? And the Chinese Communist Party, with the original product in China, was a short form news product called Taobao back in 2012. Loved it because you could insert content and get it to everybody without having to have somebody follow you. So it was a very specific product that the Chinese really supported from the beginning.
So they could just insert specific content into people's feeds.
Yeah, think about it. The original product. So there's three big products ByteDance has: Taobao, Douyin, and TikTok, right? TikTok has 2 billion users globally, 170 million in the US, and it's primarily used in the Western world. And in China, the equivalent is Douyin, which has very different content. And the first product was this product Taobao. Actually, it was the original name of the company before they changed it to ByteDance, the parent company. And the Chinese government loved this and supported it early because they could re-indoctrinate people, right? They could see if you read an article on pro-Western world and anti-communism, they could re-indoctrinate you, right? They could gradually shift you. It uses some technology called weight shifting, where over time it could actually move you. So this thing was designed from the beginning to influence a population.
And so what do you make of what we're seeing on Israel? You heard my open, and why should people be worried about TikTok? Fill us in for the uninformed.
Listen. The anomaly I think everybody saw, and some people like the Kyle Basses of the world who have good access to information have tweeted about this. It's pretty amazing how on October 7th the pro-Palestine positions almost immediately took place, right? You think, okay, maybe there should be some content to that direction deep into the war, right? But it was almost immediately October 7th, which is horrific that took place. So. Just hidden in plain sight there, right? The algorithm kind of controls what content and it goes viral and what people see. And what people don't understand, what it does, Rabbi, is it does it based on groupings, right? So it groups people based on their interests, right? So this is a technology that they could literally group everybody at Columbia right now and say, okay, these are extremes, so we can start feeding them more extreme content and put them in a particular group. They could group people on the UCLA campus. Okay, these are people in the middle. We could start to shift them more this way. And so it's actually how the product works.
Meaning this isn't, this is what we call a feature, not a bug, meaning TikTok was built in order to influence the user and push them towards certain positions that they already maybe are far from, but seem susceptible to, and it was essentially built for that purpose as opposed to other social media platforms.
100%. There was a gentleman named Lu Wei, who is Xi's internet propaganda czar, Xi Jinping, the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, who reported directly to him, who was involved in the company very early. Very early, back in 2012 with the predecessor companies.
Okay, and what is the relationship? One piece that we haven't really touched on enough. What is the relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok? And in terms of, if someone's using TikTok and the algorithm is taking in their information, how direct is the link between that user experience and the actual Chinese Communist Party?
Listen, the Chinese, when President Trump went to ban it back in 2000, the Chinese Communist Party immediately passed a law which said, thou shall not transfer any technology without our approval, right? And here's one thing that, I think we're making a mistake in the U.S. on this is control in China is, unwavering control, right? It's communism. So you could own 1% of a country, 1% of a company and be in China. Chinese control in China is not what we think of it in the Western world. It's not equity ownership in a company. It's not all the things that we would kind of think about. So they're really, the loyalty of the people who run TikTok and ByteDance to the Communist Party is the control.
Wow. So that means that, again, our users, kids sitting in Israel using TikTok, are being directly influenced by the agenda of the people sitting somewhere who are choosing to push narratives.
We know specifically there are thousands and thousands of Chinese citizens who cycle out of Silicon Valley every 90 days on visas that work on the product. Right. So all you need is one or two of those individuals to be feeding information or have access to the algorithm or things like that. So these could be people in the U.S. that, are just beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. It's a real bee's nest to clean this thing up.
So, Brian, we only have about 45 seconds left. If you could just tell us, what do you think people should do? Meaning, like, people have kids who are using TikTok, or, in terms of some of the legislations that's passed. We only have a few seconds left. What would your advice be to our viewers?
I mean, listen, I personally would get off the product. I know that's hard to do with your kids. So specifically as it relates to what's going on with Israel and Palestine, I would have direct conversations with your kids. I'm very concerned that, information like what happened with this refugee camp and, the false information that's out there, that's going to be propagated on TikTok to continue to drive people to take positions that aren't based on the facts. They're not based on the history. They're not based on the content. They're based on some short video that was driven to divide people. So if you can get your kids off it, great. But if you can't get your kids off it, make sure you have, direct conversations with them about what's going on. And
Brian Costello, thank you for your clarity, and thank you for for being in this fight and revealing the information you reveal. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel in just a few moments. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. I am here in the Israel 365 studios just outside of Jerusalem. And joining me in the studio today is Dr. Tricia Miller. Dr. Tricia Miller works for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, otherwise known as CAMERA. They've been around for over 40 years, and as their name implies, they monitor accuracy in the reporting on events in the Middle East, specifically relating to Israel, because Israel is victim of so many lies and so much misrepresentation. As you know, if you are part of the audience of this show, we deal with lies about Israel every single week. And Tricia Miller's specific job in CAMERA is monitoring Christian media Trish is also an ordained pastor, so she's well qualified to understand some of the underpinnings of this misinformation in Christian media, and she's here visiting Israel at this time. Thank you so much for visiting Israel, Dr. Miller, at this time during a war, and thank you for being in our studio.
Thank you, Rabbi Pesach, and I'm very glad to be here. Very happy to be in Israel.
You monitor Christian media, and you've been monitoring it for years, and especially since October 7th and this war, there's so much misinformation about Israel. Let's focus for the education of our viewers. Let's focus on the main lies that you're encountering. What are the key, most prominent or most problematic lies that are specific to Christian media that relate to this war?
All right. The war has exaggerated or amplified what has been going on historically in the Christian world. First, the good news. There are millions and millions of evangelical Christians around the world who support Israel. And it's because they read the Bible. They know what the Bible says about God's plan for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel. The bad news is that there is also a movement that is opposing that. And it's based in bad theology, which we can talk about if you want to, but it is amplified since the beginning of the war because of the mainstream media and because of the efforts of the enemies of Israel in the Christian world to make Israel look like the bad guy here. Israel is demonized more than ever because Israel has had to go into Gaza to try to prevent Hamas from having the ability to do again what they did on October 7th.
So give me an example of a lie that Christians are being told or that is becoming popular in the Christian media.
A popular lie is the Jews are bloodthirsty people, that they are the aggressors, that they and this is a lie as old as the book of Esther, based on the Christian interpretation of Esther, that the Jews like to kill people, so this is nothing new. But now, because of the war, Israel is being portrayed as the aggressor, and everything is being forgotten about what happened on October 7th. It's as if Israel wants to go kill civilians. So a specific lie is that the civilians are being targeted by Israel. Civilians are dying. Yes, civilians are dying because civilians die in war. But in this war in particular, civilians are being used by Hamas as civilian shields. And Israel, on the other hand, is doing everything they can to protect civilian lives. But the lie that is being propaganda, and it's a blood libel. For centuries and centuries and centuries, there's been blood libels. But that's what's being told now, is that Israel is killing civilians purposefully.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on this show, about the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths that is actually lower than any other urban combat situation. We've talked about that on this show. You talked about bad theology. Could you give me an example of a particular point that relates directly to the Israel-Arab conflict, the conflict right now with the Palestinian Arabs, that would be built on bad Christian theology?
Okay, well, there's a theology that's been in the church since pretty much the end of the first century. And that's called replacement theology. That's what we call it now. It wasn't referred to that historically. But the age-old belief is that Christians in the church have replaced Jews in Israel and the purposes of God. So fast forward to now, and the reason Israel is demonized and is considered illegitimate is that the Jews don't belong here now. Because if they've been replaced in the purposes of God by the church, by Christians, the Jews have no right to this land here and now. The lie is told that the Jews who are here now are not descended, they're not related to the ancient Israelites. That's false, it's a lie. And then in direct application to this war, it just gets magnified, because what right do these Jews have to be trying to eliminate Hamas terrorists who did what they did on October 7th.
Tricia, this what you just said about how there are many Christians who believe that the Jews of today are not the same as the Jews of the Bible. I did a segment on that on my show not long ago. I've encountered this myself as a Jew, and one thing that a lot of Christians don't realize is that the Jewish people have an unbroken chain of tradition, of books being written in every generation and every century, going all the way back to biblical times. And we know exactly who we are. And we even have lists of teacher to student, of rabbis, teacher to student, an unbroken chain going all the way back to biblical times. So whenever I hear this claim, and I hear this claim periodically, I always say to people, I tell them this, and you can even look up on the internet and find these lists. And I say, okay, so tell me, where does the lie begin? Because if the Jewish people today are the same as the Jewish people, let's say, of 200 years ago, which no one would deny, and the Jewish people of 200 years ago are the same as the Jewish people of 400 years ago or 500 years ago, and on it goes, because I could show you books from every one of these time periods. So there's this, but these misconceptions run deep. We were talking before we went into the studio, and you mentioned that there's idea out there that Jesus was a Palestinian. And I've heard this one too. Can you talk about that, where it comes from and what's wrong with it?
It comes from Palestinian Christian theology. There are Palestinian theologians, Christian theologians, who propagate this. They take replacement theology one step further. And they say that the Palestinian people are the indigenous people of the land. For one thing, the Palestinian people is a made up name, that's another
topic I've dealt with on my show.
But I hate using the term because it gives legitimacy to the term when it's not accurate. So I at least need to say, there needs to be a disclaimer here, it's not an accurate term. But the world knows them as the Palestinian people. The Palestinian theologians claim that they are the indigenous people of the land. The Jews were not here. One of these theologians, Mitri Raheb, who was the former pastor of the Bethlehem Church in Bethlehem, he, in 2010, speaking at a Christ at the Checkpoint conference, he said if you compare his DNA to Bibi Netanyahu, there would be no match. But if you compare his DNA to Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem, there would be a match. So he's claiming that the Jews who are here now only came here a couple hundred years ago. So the logical conclusion from that teaching, which is completely erroneous, it's completely non-biblical, they're rewriting the Bible, but the conclusion is, well, if there were no Jews here 2,000 years ago, Jesus can't be Jewish. He's Palestinian. So they're not only delegitimizing the Jewish people, delegitimizing the existence of Israel, but they are deconstructing the Christian faith. And many Christians do not understand that. Too many Christians are biblically illiterate, and they're not understanding how their faith is being deconstructed for the purpose of demonizing Israel.
I mean, it's a strange assertion also because the people who call themselves the Palestinians today are Arab peoples.
Yes.
In fact, the charter of the Palestinian Liberation Organization of Yasser Arafat, the original, and that was the term Palestinian for this group of people only started being used in the 1950s.
Yes.
But in the opening paragraph of their charter, it says that they are part of the Arab nation.
That's right.
So there's kind of like this built-in contradiction there.
Right.
That.
Well, the whole thing is based on lies, and lies tend to contradict themselves. You can't keep a straight narrative going when it's based on lies, and they don't want to be confused with the facts. With the biblical facts, with historical facts, with any facts.
Okay, Tricia, we have 2 minutes left. Give me one more lie you're encountering.
That is, I think that's the most important to focus on. And I want Christians to understand that they need to be biblically literate, that they need to focus, they need to read the Bible, they need to know what the Bible actually says. They need to understand that the Bible says Israel is the apple of God's eye, the Jewish people are the apple of God's eye. And Christians, if you are opposing the Jewish people or opposing Israel, you're opposing God. That's what it boils down to. And I just want to make an appeal to all Christians out there to come to Israel, stand in support of Israel. I'm here, it's safe. Whatever you see in the media, you cannot trust what's in the media. Come to Israel, stand with the Jewish people.
Dr. Miller, Could you please tell our viewers how they could follow your work, how they could find your writings, how they could follow what CAMRA is doing? Because again, CAMRA, as its name stands for, is really fighting the battle for accuracy in Middle East reporting. There's so many lies being told about what's going on in the Middle East, and CAMRA's entire mission is to combat that. So please tell everyone where they could find CAMRA's work, where they could find your work.
Okay. CAMRA's website is CAMRA. It's www.camra.org. You can reach me by email, Tricia, Tricia, @camra.org. And I recommend you going to the CAMRA website. It's a phenomenal source of information. Most recent article on the top, as you page down, it just keeps going, but you can search by topic. You can find anything you want that's happened in relation to Israel for the last 40 years.
Yeah, I always say that the story of Israel and its conflict with its enemies currently is one topic that, if you know very little about it, you'll believe the other side.
Right.
And the more you know about it, the more you understand the justice of Israel's position. It really requires educating yourself. And I think what we're seeing with so much anti-Israel sentiment is really built on a lot of ignorance. So thank you for doing the work that you do. And thank you for being with us in the studio. And thank you for visiting Israel at a time of war.
Thank you.
Dr. Tricia Miller joining us in the studio. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel right after this. The Bible is the #1 best-selling book in the world. Is that a surprise to anyone? It's the Word of God and, of course, the best guidebook for life, the handbook for planet Earth, as I like to say. So, if you've seen one Bible, a lot of people think you've seen them all, right? Wrong. The Israel Bible is like no other Bible you've ever seen. The Israel Bible combines the original Hebrew text with clear, accurate English translations that bring these ancient words to life like never before. It is filled with beautiful charts, maps, and illustrations. The Israel Bible is vital for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of the Bible. And unlike any other Bible, the Israel Bible is a window into the divine connection between the scriptures, the land of Israel, and our lives. Its illuminating commentary focuses on the land of Israel, explaining why the fate of humanity rests on this one small country, and understanding God's promises and prophecies for the end times. To purchase your Israel Bible, go to getmyisraelbible.com today. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. I am honored to be joined in the Israel 365 studios here in Israel by Dr. Brad Young, Professor Brad Young. He's Professor Emeritus from Oral Roberts University's School of Divinity, where he taught for 31 years. And he's also the author of a very important translation of the Christian scriptures called the Newer Testament. And he studied many years ago at Hebrew University under the great Jewish scholar David Flusser. And he was involved in editing and translating many of his works. He's a great friend of Israel and a great friend of the Jewish people and a great friend of mine. Dr. Brad Young, welcome to the studio.
Rabbi Pesach, it's so great to be with you today, right here at the studio in Israel.
Well, thank you, Dr. Young. So your translation of the New Testament, there's a lot of translations out there. Why do we need another translation? What's important about what you did in this book?
The goal of our translation is to get back to the Jewish context, the first century context. Most translations just go from Greek to English, 1, 2. We have a third intermediate step where we take the Greek text, we say, what did it mean in Hebrew? What did it mean to the Jewish people? Then we give it the first century meaning. And so you hear as the first disciples heard.
It's so interesting that you say that because, I'm an unusual rabbi. I'm an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, but because for many years I have been involved in Jewish-Christian relations, and that's how we know each other. I've given guest lectures at Oral Roberts in your classroom.
You're very popular.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. But as an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, one of the things that makes me unusual is that I've read the New Testament and I read Christian theology and Christian exegesis. And it's happened so many times that I've been reading a passage in the New Testament just to educate myself about what Christians believe. And I see something, and knowing that the authors of every book of the New Testament And all the people they were speaking to and writing for at the time were Jews. I'll read a passage and I'll say, I know what they're referring to, but I'm not sure that Christian readers know what they're referring to, because there are all kinds of nuances that are Jewish and even coming from the rabbinic sources of the time that Christians are unaware of. So is this what you're uncovering in the book? Is this the goal?
We see it a lot. I felt that when I came to Israel, started studying, and I just realized, well, Jesus was Jewish. Somebody said, well, he died Jewish, he rose again a Presbyterian. No, it didn't work that way. He never changed religions. So if he uses an idiom like good eye, when you say that in Hebrew, from Proverbs, from Deuteronomy, from the rabbinic literature, that's generosity. But we even have a recent, very good modern translation, the ESV, that says, if your eye's healthy. And so we tried to say, if your eye is good, showing generosity. Showing generosity is in square brackets because that's that's not in the text, but you don't hear as the disciples heard unless you see the generosity.
Right, ayin tovah in Hebrew doesn't just mean a good eye, like you see well. It literally means being generous. So if it's directly translated, people think that that's accurate. But if it's directly translated, you lose the original idiom.
So it's a whole attitude to life and other people. And I love that Hebrew understanding of gamliut chasadim, these mercies and kindness, random acts of kindness. I've been thinking things like, key passages in the teachings of Jesus, like the kingdom. I think we understand it better when we look at the Jewish context and prayers. Everyone that says the Shema has received the kingdom. And so Jesus makes that a very dynamic concept. And too many people think it's life after death, or, they don't see the context of love, forgiveness, reconciliation.
So to turn to a bit more serious topic, over the course of centuries, the church developed a theology that isn't in the New Testament, but they developed this theology that the church had replaced Israel, that Christianity is the new Israel, and that the covenants of the Jews are no longer in force. And still today, with the Jewish people having returned to our land after thousands of years, which would seem to be a verification that the covenants are still in force, you still have a lot of Christians who push back and maintain this replacement theology. What are they missing in the reading of their own text? What are they missing? Like in just a few minutes, if you could explain, like, what is if you're talking to a Christian who's watching this, who maybe does believe that theology or was raised on it and has questions about the Jews because, hey, the Jews don't believe in Jesus and hasn't the church replaced Israel, what would you say to them?
Well, that's one reason why we call it the Newer Testament, because we have to have the older as a platform, the vintage, the original. So if we look in Israel, the term in the Older Testament, over 2,000 times, and it's the people, it's the family. But when we go to the Newer Testament, people say, well, Israel just means the church. And so what we're trying to show in footnotes and context is that Israel is Israel, and it's the Jewish people today. And of course, the great blessing of Israel today in the world, bringing democracy, being an example in the Middle East, really is a part of seeing Israel today. I think, as Jonathan Sacks, he said, well, the first time you have reconciliation in any of the history of the world is when Joseph forgave his brothers. And I think there it is in Genesis. His brothers threw him into the pit, sold him into slavery, and then he forgives them. And what's the message of Jesus in the Gospels? It's reconciliation. We have the parable of the prodigal son, the two brothers, and he's bringing reconciliation to them. And I think that's a big part of what we see Israel in the Bible, Israel in the New Testament. Israel's used nearly 80 times, 75 times about in the New Testament. It's referring to the people of Israel. And so I think that's a way we've got to read the Bible in context. We have to get the first century meaning and hear it more like the disciples. I mean, when the disciples asked Jesus in Acts 1, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Of course, they were thinking of the people, the physical people. And Jesus says, it's going to happen, but it'll be the time determined by the Father.
So, Dr. Young, we have a few minutes left. You wrote a tremendous work that was originally in your doctoral work, but you also came out with 2 books on Jesus parables. And I've read those books. And in those books, you source a lot of what Jesus says in his famous parables in Jewish teachings. Can you give just one quick example of that? Again, for our viewers who might not be familiar with your work or who are skeptical of the Jewish roots of Jesus' teachings.
Well, you know, I like that parable of the prodigal son. I like to call it the compassionate father and the 2 lost sons. But it says when the son came to himself, he wanted to go back to his father. And you know, that phrase is not right in Greek. And then when you translate it, literally people don't quite understand it. But
What
as
the
you know
phrase
very well,
came to himself.
if you go back into rabbinic parables like this, it is a technical term for repentance, which is chazar b'cha.
Right.
Chazar b'cha
Right.
is not used in the Hebrew scriptures. It's tshuva. But you get in this time of the Hebrew that was living at the time, to come to yourself was, you're going to become what God really created you to be. You're returning home to your Father. And we have beautiful rabbinic parables that illustrate this too. So I think when we study rabbinic Jewish parables with Jesus' parables, we understand both better. But it's so wonderful to think that you can come back to yourself and enter into a relationship with your Father and have the healing of relationships with others. Your elder brother in this case.
That's beautiful, the idea, and I never thought about it before because, again, it's a Hebrew expression, and like so many expressions in our native languages, we don't really think about what they mean, but it's true. The concept of repentance in Hebrew is really just returning to your own true identity. And that says something very beautiful, that our true identities are with God and are pure. And sin is really just imperfections that that we've soiled ourselves with, as it were, and we're returning to where we're really supposed to be. When the first sin is committed by Adam, God says to him, "Where are you?" In other words, you're not where you're supposed to be. And it's really about the return to self. And I think that speaks also to the work that you do, which is the original church, Jesus and all of his disciples, they were all Jews. Everyone Jesus speaks to is Jewish. That's the context that the Christian scriptures were written in. And a return to those roots is really a return to the original identity of those people and those scriptures.
He breathed in man and he became a living soul. And you think that every person has that longing for God and they have that openness to God. And when you come to yourself, you really give yourself over to the Lord. There can be this great spiritual renewal and restoration. It's so exciting when people get that and enter into this deeper spiritual life through faith and commitment and scripture.
Dr. Young, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's an honor to call you a friend. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the Jewish people for the work that you've done in bringing about Jewish-Christian reconciliation in our time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Pesach. It's my honor.
God bless. Thank you for watching Eyes on Israel.